This woman, her name is Cassidy, spent 5 years building what she thought was the perfect relationship. She had everything planned, the venue was booked, the dress was fitted, and the engagement party invitations were already sent out. But one evening, during what should have been an intimate moment of vulnerability and trust, she shared something from her past, something she believed would bring them closer together. Instead, within 30 days, her entire world came crashing down around her. Welcome back to Mrs. Emma, where I bring you the most compelling, heartbreaking, and thought-provoking real-life stories. I'm Emma, your storyteller, and today's journey is going to take us deep into the complicated territory of honesty, timing, and the weight of our past decisions. Before we dive in, if you appreciate raw, authentic storytelling, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Cassidy was 27 when everything unraveled. For half a decade, she'd been with Garrett, 5 years of what she considered careful cultivation and dedication. When they first met, he was different from who he would eventually become. Reserved, almost timid in social situations. His wardrobe consisted mainly of comfortable but uninspired clothing choices. Weekend plans rarely extended beyond gaming sessions with old college friends. But Cassidy saw potential. She didn't just see the quiet computer programmer who struggled with small talk at office parties. She saw a diamond that needed polishing, a masterpiece waiting to be revealed. So she took on that project with dedication and focus. She became his guide in social situations, teaching him how to navigate networking events with confidence. She revolutionized his wardrobe, introducing him to styles that made him look more polished and professional. She structured their social calendar, ensuring they spent time with people who could elevate them both. Slowly, methodically, she reshaped their relationship into something she believed was extraordinary. Their friends would comment on how perfect they seemed together. Cassidy made certain of that. She curated their social media presence, planned thoughtful date nights, and maintained what she viewed as appropriate boundaries. If Garrett wanted to spend time with old friends, she'd discover urgent situations that required his presence. Not manipulation, she'd tell herself, just proper priorities. After all, shouldn't a committed partner always come first? She maintained access to his phone, just to ensure trust and transparency, she reasoned. Meanwhile, her own device remained private. She justified this asymmetry easily. Her work involved sensitive information and family matters he didn't need to worry about. It was consideration, not hypocrisy. Financially, they'd developed a system. Garrett's larger salary meant he covered most shared expenses: rent, dining out, groceries, entertainment. Cassidy saved her income, setting aside funds for their future, the wedding she'd been dreaming about, emergency reserves, smart financial planning. It seemed logical and fair in her mind. As their engagement approached, Cassidy felt immense pride in what she'd constructed. She'd look at other couples and feel genuine sympathy for those who hadn't learned to properly manage their relationships. Women who let their boyfriends maintain complete independence seemed naive to her. She believed she understood something they didn't. Relationships required strategic thinking and careful control. But then something unexpected began happening. As wedding planning intensified, Garrett started changing in ways Cassidy hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, he had opinions about flower arrangements, music selections, and guest lists, things he'd never shown interest in before. He questioned some of her decisions, which felt completely out of character. When she'd gently remind him, through jokes about men lacking style, or suggestions that he should trust her vision, he'd go quiet. Not agreeable quiet like before, a different kind of quiet that felt like distance. Work stress seemed to compound everything. He'd come home exhausted, uninterested in discussing wedding details she considered crucial. When he'd try to decompress with television, she'd remember urgent matters they needed to address. After all, this was supposed to be the most important time in their lives. How could he not prioritize that? She noticed other changes too. His phone habits shifted. He'd place it face down during dinner or take it with him to the bathroom. When she'd casually reach for it, he'd offer to look up whatever she needed himself. Why this new boundary? They were supposed to share everything. His old friends were reaching out more often, inviting him for drinks or sports games. Instead of automatically declining like he used to, he'd actually consider accepting. Cassidy would have to remind him of their wedding obligations or explain how difficult her day had been, how much she needed him present. Sometimes tears came naturally during these conversations, and they usually proved effective. The most frustrating development was his questioning of their financial arrangement. He suggested they split wedding costs more evenly, but that made no sense to Cassidy. His job paid better, and tradition dictated men handle major expenses. Plus, she was doing all the emotional labor of planning. Shouldn't that count for something? She'd mention other couples they knew, friends whose partners were getting impressive promotions, buying homes, planning elaborate honeymoons. Just conversation, she thought. But Garrett would withdraw into himself afterward. She was only trying to motivate him, to help him see his own potential. During this period of tension, Cassidy began contemplating a new strategy. Maybe she needed to share more about who she'd been before they met. Help him understand that she'd had options, plenty of them, but had chosen him. Perhaps that knowledge would make him appreciate her more, remind him not to take her for granted. She started testing the waters with vague references to her college years. How different she used to be. How much she'd matured. How much more serious she was now about relationships and commitment. She watched for his reactions, curious if a touch of jealousy might refocus his attention. But the whole dynamic felt increasingly unstable. Garrett was becoming less predictable, less easily managed. He wanted to discuss decisions rather than simply accepting her plans. He talked about needing space to think through things. What was there to think about? Everything was already decided. They were getting married. Cassidy realized she needed to do something significant, something that would shift the power balance back to where it had been. She decided complete honesty was the answer. Sharing her past would show him how much she trusted him, remind him of everything she was choosing to give him, and ultimately bring them closer together. At least, that's what she believed would happen. Friday evening arrived, their typical wine night at home, a weekly ritual after exhausting days of work and wedding planning. Cassidy had been building toward this conversation for weeks, and tonight felt right. She eased into it gradually, discussing how much they'd both grown since college, how immature they'd been back then compared to the serious commitment they were building now. Garrett responded warmly, expressing gratitude that they'd found each other when they were ready for something meaningful. Then he asked about her dating history. Finally. After weeks of hints, he was curious enough to ask directly. Cassidy told him about her junior year breakup. 8 months with someone who'd betrayed her completely, cheating with a classmate. The devastation had been overwhelming. She'd never experienced that level of hurt before, and it had knocked her completely off balance. Garrett responded with compassion, holding her hand, being supportive. So she continued, explaining the phase that followed. How lost she'd felt. How desperately she'd wanted to feel good about herself again, to prove she was still attractive and desirable. She'd done things during that time that she wasn't particularly proud of, but they'd been part of her journey toward becoming who she was now. When he pressed for specifics, she gave them. Approximately 1 month after that breakup, she'd been with 15 different people. Maybe more. She'd honestly stopped counting after 15 because it all blurred together. Parties, mutual friends, random encounters. It was completely unlike anything she'd done before or since. She emphasized how different that time was from her current values. It hadn't been about connection or relationships, just physical experiences while trying to rebuild her shattered confidence. And that's exactly why their relationship was so special. She'd experienced that emptiness and knew how much more meaningful real love was. Cassidy expected appreciation for her vulnerability. She was sharing something she'd never told anyone else, giving him the complete picture of her journey. Instead, Garrett went silent. Uncomfortably silent. He started asking questions about details that seemed irrelevant. When exactly had this happened? Who were these people? Why did it matter? It was years ago, long before they'd even met. She tried explaining it was just a phase, something she'd completely moved past. But he kept pushing for more information, and her frustration grew. This wasn't going according to plan at all. She'd expected momentary surprise, then gratitude for her honesty. Instead, he was acting like she'd done something wrong. She reminded him this was before they'd met. It had nothing to do with their relationship. The fact that she was telling him proved how much she trusted him. But with every explanation, he seemed to withdraw further. By the time their conversation ended that night, he said he needed to think about things. Think about what? This was her past, not their present. She'd chosen him over everyone else. This should have proved that even more clearly. Saturday morning brought no improvement. If anything, Garrett was more distant, quiet during breakfast, one-word responses, barely looking at her. They were supposed to be planning their future, and he was sulking about something that happened before she even knew he existed. Cassidy tried being patient. She understood men could be sensitive about these things, even when it was completely irrational. She explained again, ancient history, different person then. Sharing it was a sign of how serious she was about their relationship. Most women would never be that honest with their boyfriends. He should feel grateful she trusted him enough to be vulnerable. But instead of appreciation, more questions came. Why hadn't she told him before? Why tell him now? Did anyone else know? It felt like an interrogation rather than support. She had to remind him this wasn't about him. This was about her trusting him with her most private experiences. When she pointed out he was being judgmental, he denied it, but said he needed time to process. Process what exactly? She hadn't cheated on him or lied to him. She simply hadn't brought up every single detail of her college years because, honestly, why would she? People don't usually share their complete sexual history with partners. That's normal. Her frustration intensified because this was supposed to bring them closer, and instead he was acting like she'd committed some terrible offense. She reminded him he'd specifically asked about her past, so his reaction to an honest answer made no sense. She told him if he couldn't handle dating a woman who had experiences before him, maybe he wasn't as mature as she'd thought. That's when he said he needed space to think, which made her panic. Not from guilt. She'd done nothing wrong, but because this conversation was spiraling completely out of control. She tried explaining there was nothing to think about. This was just information about who she used to be, not who she was now. What exactly was he planning to think about? Everything seemed straightforward to her. He said he needed to understand why she'd kept this from him for 5 years, which was completely unfair. She hadn't kept anything from him. He'd never asked specific questions before. She wasn't obligated to write out her entire sexual history when they started dating. That would have been weird and inappropriate. She tried turning the conversation around, asking about his past, but apparently he'd already shared about his 3 previous relationships years ago. His had all been serious and long-term, not random encounters, which supposedly made them different. She pointed out they'd both had lives before each other, and those experiences made them who they were. Sunday brought more of the same. Distance. Silence. Him on his laptop instead of focusing on them. He was clearly overthinking everything instead of just accepting this was part of her journey toward becoming the woman he fell in love with. Cassidy's annoyance peaked. They had wedding planning to do, vendor calls to make, decisions to finalize. He was wasting time being moody about something that had literally nothing to do with their future together. She finally told him if he was going to keep acting like this, maybe they needed to discuss whether he was actually ready for marriage. Because marriage means accepting your partner completely, including their past. His reaction was showing her that maybe he wasn't as mature and understanding as she'd believed. She said his inability to handle her honesty was actually more concerning to her than anything she'd shared with him. That seemed to get his attention, but not in the way she expected. Instead of snapping out of it, he looked at her with an unreadable expression and said they needed to have a serious conversation about their relationship, which terrified her. Because serious conversations usually meant someone was about to do something stupid. When Garrett said they needed that serious conversation, Cassidy knew things had escalated beyond her control. They were talking about ending an engagement over something that happened before they even met. It was absolutely insane. But his tone told her he wasn't being dramatic. He was genuinely considering throwing away 5 years together. She tried staying calm while he explained his concerns, but everything he said proved how unreasonable he was being. He felt like he didn't really know her. Ridiculous after 5 years together. He was questioning their compatibility, which made no sense because they'd been perfectly compatible until she decided to be honest. He needed to reevaluate their relationship. Reevaluate what? She was still the same person she'd always been. The only difference was he now knew more about her past, and apparently he couldn't handle that. She told him his reaction was showing her who he really was, someone who would judge his fiancé for things that happened before they even met. She reminded him of everything they'd built together, all their plans, all the deposits for the wedding. Did he really want to throw all of that away because he couldn't accept that she'd had experiences before him? She pointed out that plenty of people have pasts, and mature adults don't hold previous relationships against their partners. When that didn't work, she tried a different approach. His reaction was hurting her more than he realized. She'd trusted him with the most vulnerable part of her past, something she'd never shared with anyone, and instead of support, he was making her feel ashamed of experiences that had helped shape her. Going through that difficult time in college had actually made her a better partner to him. It taught her what she didn't want in relationships, what wasn't fulfilling, how much more meaningful real love was. If anything, he should be grateful she'd learned those lessons before they met, because it meant she could appreciate what they had even more. But he kept saying he needed time. Time for what? To decide whether he could accept reality? To figure out whether he wanted to be with her or not? She told him asking for time was holding their entire relationship hostage over something that had nothing to do with them. She became emotional, not from guilt, but from disbelief that he was actually considering ending things over this. She told him if he loved her the way he claimed to, this wouldn't matter. His reaction made her question whether he'd ever really accepted her for who she was, or whether he'd just been in love with some perfect image he'd created in his head. When he said he needed to stay somewhere else for a few days to think, she completely broke down. Walking away proved he wasn't ready for marriage, because marriage is about working through problems together, not running away when things get difficult. How was she supposed to trust him in the future if this was how he handled conflict? She reminded him she'd been completely honest when she could have kept this to herself forever. His reaction was making her regret being open with him because apparently honesty wasn't something he could handle. If he left now, he was basically punishing her for trusting him, which was completely unfair. But he still packed some clothes and said he'd call in a few days. She watched him leave, unable to believe this was actually happening. 5 years of building a life together, and he was throwing it all away because he couldn't handle the fact that she'd had experiences before him. It was the most immature, insecure reaction she could have imagined. And it made her realize that maybe she'd been wrong about who he really was this whole time. Now, 6 months after everything fell apart, Cassidy is still trying to understand how completely unfair this situation became. Garrett ended their engagement permanently. And everyone, absolutely everyone, even people who barely knew the details, sided with him. The worst part is watching how well he's doing. He got promoted at work. He's been attending therapy, which seems excessive for this situation. And through mutual friends, she's heard he's dating someone new already. Someone who apparently thinks his whole growth journey is amazing. It's disturbing how quickly he moved on after 5 years together. Meanwhile, Cassidy's life was destroyed. She had to cancel their entire wedding, losing all those deposits. Explaining to everyone why they broke up was humiliating. Telling people your fiancé left because he couldn't handle your past makes everyone look at you like there must be more to the story. Work became impossible. A coworker's boyfriend heard about the situation through their friend group, and suddenly everyone in the office was whispering and giving her strange looks. She had to find a new job, setting her back financially at the worst possible time. Without Garrett covering most of their shared expenses, she couldn't afford their apartment. She had to move back in with her parents at 27, which has been absolutely humiliating. They keep asking what really happened, like they can't believe Garrett would leave over just her college phase. Even her own family seems to think there must be more to the story. The absolute worst part is seeing him with his new girlfriend on social media. She seems perfectly nice, which somehow makes it worse. She's not dramatically prettier or anything, just a normal woman who apparently appreciates all his personal growth and supports his therapy journey. It's like watching someone live the life that should have been hers with the man she spent 5 years building up. All their mutual friends act like their relationship goals now, which is sickening. Cassidy spent 5 years teaching Garrett how to be a good boyfriend, and now this random woman gets to benefit from all her hard work. She gets the improved version that Cassidy created while Cassidy is back at square one, trying to rebuild her entire life. She's tried dating, but it's been a disaster. Men either want to know why her long-term relationship ended, which is impossible to explain without sounding bad, or they find out somehow and judge her for it. It's like she's being punished over and over for something that happened years ago, something that had nothing to do with any of them. The financial situation has been the hardest part, starting over completely. New apartment, new job, rebuilding savings. Meanwhile, Garrett gets to keep the life they built together, plus his promotion, plus his perfect new relationship. It's like he was rewarded for abandoning her when she needed support the most. Sometimes Cassidy wonders if she should have just kept quiet about college. But then she remembers she was just being honest and trusting, and his reaction proved he was never really the man she thought he was. If he'd really loved her, her past wouldn't have mattered. The fact that it did just shows how shallow and insecure he actually was. She keeps hearing through people that he tells everyone he's grateful for the experience, that it helped him grow as a person, which is honestly the most insulting thing of all. She's not some life lesson for him to learn from. She was his fiancé, someone who loved him and trusted him with her most private experiences. And he turned her into some cautionary tale about knowing yourself before committing. Now she's 27, single, living with her parents, starting over completely while he gets to be the hero of his own story who dodged a bullet and found true love. Everyone acts like he made some wise, mature decision, when really he just proved he was too insecure to handle being with a woman who'd had experiences before him. But apparently that's not how anyone else sees it. And Cassidy is the one who has to live with the consequences of his immaturity forever. And there you have it. Cassidy's story, a tale of honesty, timing, and the complex ways our past shapes our present. I'm Emma, and I want to hear from you. What do you think about this situation? Was Cassidy right to share this part of her past? Should Garrett have reacted differently? Or is there something deeper happening here that we all need to consider? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I truly value your perspectives on these complicated real-life situations. If this story resonated with you, whether it made you think, made you feel, or made you see relationships from a different angle, please hit that like button. It helps more people discover these stories and join our community of thoughtful, engaged viewers. Share this video with friends who appreciate honest conversations about relationships, trust, and the weight of our choices. These are the kinds of stories that spark important discussions. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mrs. Emma. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Every week, I bring you compelling, authentic, thought-provoking narratives that explore the messy, beautiful, complicated reality of human relationships. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being part of this community where we explore these difficult topics together with empathy and understanding. I'm Emma, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.